Due to the double landings on Florida Island and the assault on Tulagi, which I mentioned in my earlier video, the landings on Gavutu and Tanambogo were delayed for a few hours. In the east on Florida Island, the 1st Battalion 2nd Marines landed without incident on 0845 on August 7th, in order to provide flank protection for the assault on Gavutu. Gavutu had the higher elevation of the two islands, so it would be taken first. This allowed air cover to be switched from Tulagi to Gavutu, and then later Tanambogo. Gavutu and Tanambogo housed the Japanese seaplane base as well as 536 Japanese naval personnel from the Yokohama Air Group and a 3rd Kure Special Naval Landing Force. Also, there were Korean and Japanese civilian technicians and laborers from the 14th Construction Unit. The Japanese on both islands were well entrenched in bunkers and caves constructed on both hills. Both islands were mutually supportive since each was in machine gun range of the other. U.S. commanders underestimated the amount of Japanese troops and personnel on the islands, believing they were garrisoned by only 200 naval troops and construction workers. At noon on August 7th, Gavutu was assaulted by 397 men of the U.S. Marine 1st Parachute Battalion. The assault was delayed because there were not enough aircraft to provide air cover for the Tulagi and Gavutu landings at the same time. The preceding naval bombardment damaged the seaplane ramp, forcing the naval landing craft to land the Marines in a more exposed area on a nearby beach and dock. Japanese machine gun fire began inflicting heavy casualties, killing or wounding a tenth of the landing Marines as they scrambled inland in an attempt to get out of the crossfire coming from both islands. The preceding naval bombardment damaged the seaplane ramp, forcing the naval landing craft to land the Marines in a more exposed area on a nearby beach and dock. Japanese machine gun fire began inflicting heavy casualties, killing or wounding a tenth of the landing Marines as they scrambled inland in an attempt to get out of the crossfire coming from both islands. Marines also gave suppressive fire with machine guns and mortars on the Japanese machine gun emplacements on Tanambogo. American dive bombers dropped several bombs on Tanambogo, diminishing some of the volume of fire from that location. After about 2 hours, Marines reached and climbed Hill 148. Working from the top, the Marines cleared the Japanese fighting positions on the hill with explosive charges, grenades, and hand-to-hand combat. From the top of the hill, the Marines were also able to put increased suppressive fire on Tanambogo. Throughout the night, the Japanese staged isolated attacks on the Marines on Gavutu under the concealment of heavy thunderstorms. The 3rd Battalion began landing on Gavutu at 10 a.m. on August 8th and assisted in destroying the remaining Japanese defenses on that island, which was completed by noon. In order to secure Gavutu, Tanambogo would have to be taken in order to stop the Japanese flanking fire, which was delaying the operation. Most of the 240 Japanese defenders on Tanambogo were aircrew and maintenance personnel from the Yokohama Air Group. Many of these were aircraft maintenance personnel and construction units not equipped for combat. One of the few Japanese soldiers captured stated that they had fought with only hand sickles and poles. Since U.S. commanders believed Tanambogo was lightly defended, they only sent one company of Marines from the 1st Battalion 2nd Marine Regiment on Florida Island. This company attempted an amphibious assault shortly after dark on August 7th. The first boat came ashore without incident. As the second boat ground to a halt on the landing beach, a shell from a naval gunfire ship struck a nearby Japanese gasoline storage area. The explosion and resulting glare exposed the assaulting Marines and the last 3 landing craft as they approached the shore. Many of the U.S. Navy boat crews were killed or wounded. The resulting firefight was a nightmare for the Marines, withdrawing back to Gavutu by 2200. Realizing the position was untenable, the Marine Company commander ordered the remaining boats to depart with the wounded Marines, and he and 12 men, who had already landed, sprinted across the causeway to Gavutu. The Japanese on Tanambogo suffered 10 killed in the day's fighting. The 3rd Battalion 2nd Marines, still embarked on ships off Guadalcanal, was notified to prepare to assault Tanambogo on August 8th. They were to reinforce the parachutists on Gavutu and then attack Tanambogo. The Marines on Gavutu provided covering fire for the attack. In preparation for the assault, U.S. carrier-based dive bombers and a naval gunfire bombardment were requested. After their carrier aircraft twice accidentally dropped bombs on U.S. Marines on Gavutu, killing 4 of them, further carrier aircraft support was cancelled. The San Juan, however, placed its shells on the correct island and shelled Tanambogo for 30 minutes. The Marine assault began at 1620, both by landing craft and from across the causeway, and, with assistance from 2 Marine Stuart light tanks from the 2nd Tank Battalion, began making headway against the Japanese defenses. Once the beachhead was established, reinforcements crossed the causeway. One of the tanks became stuck on a stump and was surrounded by 50 Japanese airmen, who set fire to the tank, killing 2 of its crew, and they severely beat the other 2 crew members. Most of them were killed by Marine rifle fire soon after. The Marines later counted 42 Japanese bodies around the burnt-out tank, including the corpses of the Yokohama executive officer and several of the seaplane pilots. The Japanese overall commander of Tanambogo was Captain Miyazaki-san, who blew himself up in his dugout on the late afternoon of August 8th. Throughout the day, the Marines methodically dynamited the caves, destroying most of them by 2100. The few surviving Japanese conducted isolated attacks throughout the night, some of them hand-to-hand. By 2300, 2/3 of the island was secured. The island was completely secured by the end of August 9th. In the battle for Gavutu and Tanambogo, 476 Japanese defenders and 70 U.S. Marines or naval personnel died. The combined Florida, Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo operations had taken 3 days. American losses were light. The Japanese lost 1,500 killed in action and very few prisoners of war. Of the 20 Japanese prisoners taken during the Battle of Tanambogo, most were not actually Japanese combatants, but Korean laborers belonging to the Japanese construction unit. The majority of the U.S. Marines who had assaulted Tulagi and the nearby islands were soon relocated to Guadalcanal to help defend Henderson Airfield, located at Lunga Point. If you liked what you see, hit the subscribe button or share. Thank you. This has been EmersusTech.